All right. So, as Don said, I work in professional credentialing and licensure. We are consultants with 2 organizations that sponsor or would like to sponsor and offer professional credentials. And so this is a world that I don't know, may be the exact opposite of open recognition. Do we have a term closed recognition, or is quite a different world? So then the question becomes, what am I doing here? And Don, of course, I am a member of the Don Lured Me Here Club. However, he couldn't have done it, I guarantee you, if I hadn't been predisposed. And I'll tell you why I'm predisposed, and it's really in my genes. A lot of the things that we talked about yesterday involved work that my mother had been involved with, and bear with me, I do have to give a few shout-outs to her. But in her core was, what can we do about the inequities in education and employment and create pathways for underserved populations? And that led her to be part of the early gathering group that became CALE, which is the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning. She did her dissertation on PLA, although it was called Credit for Lifelong Learning at that time. And Julie was talking about this becoming of interest in South Africa. My mother was invited to South Africa to talk about PLA and the implementation of it. And here's the best part, or I think it's the best part. She, when she was at Educational Testing Service, she was selected to head up a prototype project for what I would call the pre-tech, non-tech precursor to a wallet or a backpack. And it involved microfiche, presenting your accomplishments on microfiche. I realize some of you might not know what that is. Google it afterwards, but let's look at it as a non-digital way to store a lot of information. And the idea would be you would put whatever achievements you wanted onto this microfiche, be it diplomas, but especially more important from my mother's perspective was work samples. And you could choose. So I would take that to an employer or present it to an institution of higher learning that I had applied to, and they would know more about me. So it really is in my genes. And also I'm here because my professional credentialing world is a little bit traditional and inflexible, and I was very interested in having interactions with people that are a little bit more flexible. But a lot of the work that we do is with professional societies, because in the US, as in a number of other countries, most or a lot of the professional certifications come out of or start within a professional society. And when Don started talking to me about open recognition, my thoughts immediately went to professional societies. And before I tell you why, I'd like to, this is the audience participation moment number 1. How many of you are members or have been a member of a professional society? Is that all? At any point in time? All right, how about a group like this, which isn't a professional society, but where you get together with peers and okay, all right. So the heart of the professional society is community, and it's a community of practitioners and subject matter experts. And so that's why my mind immediately jumped to this. So I'm going to throw out an idea. This is not about a project, it's an idea, and it's for discussion and thoughts from the group. Very interested in hearing your feedback and discussing this with the group. You won't hurt my feelings if you think this has no place in open recognition or we hate it. I have no feelings, so you don't have to worry about that whatsoever. So, first of all, associations, professional societies are big business. There are a lot of them. In the US alone, we've got tens of thousands, and I apologize, I inverted the source of these. It was IBIS Worldwide, which is an industry research organization, that noted there were over 10,000 professional associations. The American Society of Association Executives, which happens to be one of our clients, that's the professional society for staff of professional associations, trade associations, and charitable organizations. They noted in 2009 that there were over 90,000 combined in terms of trade and professional associations, trade associations being for businesses, not for individuals. And many of these associations, which are national or international, also have local chapters in societies. And within this community of professionals and practitioners, there are often mini communities. These are niches of professionals that are focused in particular areas. So there are a lot of societies. The societies have, even within them, multiple communities of practitioners and subject matter experts. And since many of you did not want to admit that you were a member of a professional society, we'll do a little 101 on this, because part of what we might talk about, depending on where the conversation goes, is what would be some strategies for approaching and engaging with professional societies in open recognition. And this is a pretty good example, I'd say characteristic, of how associations present what their purpose is. This is another one of our clients. We work on your behalf to advance the project management profession worldwide. That really is the essence of what professional societies see as being their mission. And then they talk about how they do it, this is also very characteristic. It's because we are a community, we engage in knowledge sharing, we provide knowledge sharing. And that is basically the essence for us as professional associations and supporters of lifelong learning, and we are there to help you develop the skills that you need to be an effective and successful professional. And there are other things that I think that professional societies do that can relate to open recognition. It's the professional society that creates the body of knowledge for the field. They define the scope, what is in scope or out of scope for professionals that work in this area, and also the standards of practice. Historically, they've been the go-to resource. Now we have other ways to get information and create communities, and they are feeling some of the effects of that. But whether you're a member or not a member of professional association societies, you generally, if you are in a profession, you know what that association is. So they have very broad reach within the field, and often they are known outside of the field in the larger industry or beyond. So in the US, most of us know what the American Medical Association is. And of course, it's a community. And these professional societies already engage in a range of credentialing or recognition activities. I don't know what my time is, so I won't go through a lot of these, and you can read them faster than I can go through them. That's okay. There's a long history of professional societies being involved in recognition and credentialing in various forms. And the most rigorous of that being professional certification or designations or qualifications, depending on what country you come from. And in this particular case, professional certifications will either be created and sponsored by the professional society, or they're born. We call them the parent organizations of certification programs, and an independent entity is spun off that becomes the owner of the certification and responsible for the administration of the professional certification program. There are some aspects of professional societies that can be a bit of a challenge. They are conservative and risk adverse. And when we start talking about credentialing, if they're already involved in professional certification and are knowledgeable about the standards within professional certification, they're really conservative about forms of credentialing. And of course, they have their own credentials. And one of the parts of the mindset is we have to protect our own credentials. All right? So I was thinking about this, Stella, when you were talking, because it's one thing to create a badging system within an environment in which there is no other form of credentialing, which took a lot of effort and is held very dearly, and people really worked hard to get them. It's another to bring that into an environment in which there is already like a gold standard credential. So this can be very challenging. And if I do have individuals who have that gold standard credential, they also worry whenever we bring up other forms of recognition, not because they want to keep people out, but they worry that the other stuff is going to devalue their credential. So I'm going to pause here for a moment because I've thrown out the idea. I've talked about some of the positives and the negatives. I'm wondering, did this spark any thoughts for anybody here? Yes.
I'm curious. Probably loud enough, but I'm curious. Do you think that where there's a national qualification framework, that changes professional societies? Because in my experience, professional societies in America, United States of America, have a lot to do with the credential and getting the formal recognition within the industry, whereas in Australia, as an example, to join some of the professional societies, your level of membership is based off the credential you have gained elsewhere.
Yep, absolutely, and I'm glad you brought that up. It is a different world where you have a national qualifications framework, and we tried this in the U.S. in the early 90s. There were pilot projects that were supported by the government in some industries, and guess what? It didn't take. But you're right. However, after those qualifications, there are sometimes other types of designations that are post those qualifications in which societies are sometimes involved. Did I see another hand up, Stella?
So I'm wondering what, with your experience, what is the appetite for building new things on top of what they have? Because I think sometimes it's about the way you sell things, so you're not substituting anything. And I find it similar when you're talking to universities as well. Instead of, I'm not eliminating your degrees or anything, but there are other opportunities of recognition around all the pegs that you already have,
Right.
you know. So what is the appetite for that?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Yes.
I have this rant about stackable micro-credentials where, and I think it relates to your thing about micro-certifications, where if these things can stack, then every single one has to be the same rules of quality, because otherwise it's all crap. So how does that play in? So I guess I'm throwing to your soapbox. Where you talk about micro-certifications.
Right. So if we're talking about professional societies that are involved in professional certification, that's the most conservative of the conservative when we start, or certification bodies, that's the most conservative of the conservative. And so, for instance, it took several years of vendors talking about just using a digital credential. At this time, they were being called badges, so there was that, the term, to represent the certification you already have, right? That took years of them pressing and pressing and pressing for people to accept that. Oh, micro-credentials, in 2013, we hosted the first town hall meeting for the certification community on micro-credentials. We haven't gotten a whole lot further. There's less of a knee-jerk response to them, but this is actually true. In a room of 120 people, how many of certifiers have micro-credentials? It's less than a handful. It's a lot of wait and see what other people do. It's also, well, if we start giving something for every little thing, like where does it end? There will be hundreds of them, and then none of them will have any value. So that's part of it. And unfortunately, what Don was alluding to is, if you've got a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So in professional certification circles, when they look at micro-credentials, there's a tendency to turn these into tiny certifications, and it completely defies the purpose of what digital badges and micro-credentials were about. I go back to Carla Casilli and her white paper, and I connected with her as part of the Badge Alliance. And I keep talking about that. That's not what these are here for. They're not here to be mini certifications. Now, some of you in higher ed may disagree with me, but when you turn it into a mini certification, it becomes an entirely different thing. Oh. Why don't you stand and clap, and then I can say I got a standing ovation while I was here. Okay, so I've got 10 minutes left. So anybody have one more thought before I talk about maybe how to frame this for societies? All right, so I'll talk about this a little. So the first thing is as with anything that you would do, I'm sure you're familiar with this, is you've got to understand the audience that you are working with and speak their language. So I'll tell you a little bit about this. Professional societies' mission is number one. And when they're making decisions about initiatives, they're not looking just at ROI. And in fact, in some ways, ROI is secondary. Return on mission, ROM, is primary. What will this do to help us further our mission? That is very important. And although most of them are not for profits, they still need to generate revenue. Money's still important, but mission is higher than that in many ways. And their motivations are to grow and retain their membership. That's key. And it's not just because that's where they get their money. It's because that's what the community is. And it is the community that draws people to the association. It's the community of like-minded people who do what you do that you can learn from that is the real value added of an association. And they provide the avenues for the community to be able to connect with each other. And something else that we talked about is if they're already in the credentialing business, then there's a bit of a concern that abundance of credentials is bad. Scarcity is good. And again, not because they're trying to prevent people from coming into the field. We have standards that say you cannot create these to prevent people from coming into the field. It's about it will potentially dilute the value and what this credential represents. And so then you have a story that you're going to need to craft, and you may have to, as part of that story, start to move towards a mind shift about what this process is all about, and maybe focusing in on the value to your members, which is very important because the way they grow and sustain their membership is by maximizing member value. Where does the value to our membership intersect with the value that the organization gets in terms of its mission? And there's something else I was going to say about this, but about the mind shift. What was most effective for me, and seems to be very effective with this audience, is when you start to talk about we are learning throughout our lives and throughout the career journey, okay? And other than those big professional certifications, we have no way for these people to make their learning visible and to be recognized for it. And what about after the certification, if there are no other qualifications? I continue to learn and grow, I specialize. Why aren't we providing a means to recognize that as well? I think that could be one of your more powerful things. And comparing it to things that they already do that involve peers, recognizing other peers. And if they're in professional credentialing, that is, if it's done according to standards, purely peer and practitioner driven. It's not bureaucrats that create these things. It's peers that set the scope, define the scope, peers that create the content of the assessments, peers that set the passing standard for it. So they're already involved. And there's one very good example that is outside of societies, but it has to do with professionals, is in healthcare, where peer review is very prominent in healthcare as part of quality assurance. For example, the idea is that practitioners can best evaluate the performance of other practitioners, and they have the responsibility to do that. So many of the healthcare professions do that. So my argument would be, if we are trusting professionals in healthcare to make decisions about professional practice of our peers that relate to physical harm or death, why can't we entrust them to do other forms of peer recognition? And if healthcare is willing to do it, given protection of the public, why not others? And then lastly, who else is doing it? This is very common, not just in professional societies, but when you talk about something new, who else is doing it? What are the lessons learned? And so if you can provide examples from within the field or a field that the profession emulates. So a lot of people will say things like, well, what do doctors do? Or what do accountants do for continuing professional development? How do they handle continuing professional development? Or other reputable entities that might be involved in this. And if there aren't any, and in this case there actually aren't many other examples other than that peer review process, which is to some degree outside of the societies, then a very concrete example, step by step, I will say that in open recognition, there's jargon that's not understandable to other people outside, and there are different terms that are used for the same things, and that doing that probably isn't going to be very helpful. Some of the things when we talk about, so open recognition, so a bit of trust. What's a bit of trust, right? What is, and when sometimes this gets into some of the technical intricacies, and there's T3s and there's D2s, and there's this, that, and the other thing, RSDs and OSN and the whole thing. And that's great, but even I don't understand half of it, and when I've tried to attend meetings and be part of it, it's really well beyond me. So, and you know what, even making the world a better place isn't necessarily the argument, because there are lots of things that can be done to make the world a better place, but I need to stay within my mission and how within my mission can we help to make the world a better place, and through supporting our professionals as well.
Is it? Oh, okay. So, some questions? I want to say that Lenora showed great self-control because she didn't flog her book, and that's actually the reason I reached out to Lenora originally, because back in 2017, in the Business of Certification, that the second edition, that the first of which she had co-written with her mother, and then the second edition, she actually had a whole section about micro-credentials, and that was where I first heard that micro-credentials should not be micro-certifications, and that's what caused me to follow up with her. So any questions for Lenora now? Oh, okay. Okay, coming over.
Thank you. I'm just curious whether, and this is a little bit outside of my realm of expertise, so it might be a really naive question, but are you noticing that there's more of an appetite for digital credentials as a value proposition to professional associations that maybe are unregulated? Like I'm thinking about, for example, coaching, leadership coaching.
Right. So the unregulated professions, if we're talking about regulation, at least in the US, it's licensure. It's not certification, which is a voluntary practice. And digital credentials in general have made it into the professional society world, and started out with a digital badge for attending conference. Now it might be associated with completing workshops or certificate programs, and we are seeing more micro-credentials in professional societies, more in the societies perhaps than in the certification programs. But yes, but even in a regulated profession, the licensure is just basic competence in the field, and you also have an interest potentially in credentials for beyond basic competence, or as people begin to specialize in the field or work in particular niches. So there is, and as we were saying before, probably the easiest associations or societies to connect with are those that aren't already in the credentialing business, because there is an appetite for professional credentials. Most of us know somebody or have heard of a professional credential. It's a very well-known concept